just want to say thank you, Sophie, very much for having us here, and Valentin for curating this incredible symposium. I wasn't expecting this to work, so I'm kind of retracing my steps here. In Mexico City, I spent a lot of time. Can you see the cursor? Yeah. Can you see the cursor? Yeah. I spent a lot of time in the markets with the curanderas. Now, is this too loud now? Okay. All right. With the curanderas, I was very riveted by them as a child. Spent a lot of time going there. And then later, in my later teens, I discovered Remedios Varo. And she was the introduction for me for magic, the occult, metaphysics, and magic realism. And these are paintings by Remedios Varo. The one on the left is called Creación de los Pájaros. Over here is Plum, something about the sky, Plum in the sky. I don't remember. But then later on in 72 or so, I met a wonderful teacher from South India whose name is Nitya Chaitanya Yati. It wasn't until years later that I was able to go to India, but I spent 6 months in India and studied the sacred texts with him. He was not the kind of person that gets up at 6 o'clock in the morning and goes and does yoga. He is a scholar. He was a scholar, thank God, you know. So we did spend a lot of time cooking and studying the sacred texts. This is the area where his home was, about right here, 9,000 feet up in the Fern Hill, Nilgiri Hills. And these are all tea plantations. He's the last of the Dravidian gurus, teachers in India. And so consequently, when I was there, he instilled in me something that I had never expected. I had been living in Seattle and Vashon Island with my children, and you know, glass was the mecca, and it still is in Seattle. And I had absolutely no interest in it. I really didn't. And somehow he instilled in me the understanding somewhere inside, and I think it had to do also with the sacred text that he was leading me through, of the properties of the alchemical glass. And so suddenly glass was in my curiosity. I became curious about it, and came back to Seattle and went to Pilchuck Glass School. This is Pilchuck Glass School. This here is what they call a hot shop, and it pulses with the furnace. You just can't even believe it. It's so beautiful. Over here is our lodge where we ate lunch. Over here are the people that are blowing glass. And I started my first, I did 2 installations in the same year. This is right soon after I had started working in glass. And both of them were hermetic installations. This is called Falling Bodies Taking Flight. I had been researching the orange, and it was such a fascinating fruit. And I believed then, and I'm certain to this day, that it is the golden apple of the Hesperides, and the fruit of the fall. So this is called Falling Bodies Taking Flight, and the bottom of this, underneath, is a huge mound of branches, and they're underneath the glass branches are hazel tree branches. These are all tied in with Avalon and other things. I mean, there's many layers to this. But the top are these glass branches, as you can see here. So it required a large kiln to be able to work with this. And it felt like when you saw that, it froze that moment. And the glass did that. It froze it as though you were stepping into an astronomical event. And these here, the falling bodies, which are, you know, the oranges, when they moved into the cosmos, of course, then they turned into planetary bodies. And that was the freedom of that paradigm of the fall. So that was very compelling to me for several years. And then the outside of the show, the outside of the installation was a large wall covered with what I call milagros. And I just loved making these. Each one had its own herbs and wax and this and that and the other, and all kinds of offering tchotchkes that go in there. That's a terrible word to use, but anyway, over here is shown the geometry, the sacred geometry. And I loved when I was walking by and photographing the oranges, how the geometry of the hive showed up, the hexagonal aspect of the hive would show up in the oranges. So I put the oranges in the background, tying together the beginning, the falling bodies as well as the Milagro wall. And people were able to buy these for $5, anywhere between $5 and $20. And this is my next stage in the glass world, is to learn a little bit about weaving. And this shows the Mayan goddess Ixchel, who was very, very powerful in the pantheon, in the Mesoamerican pantheon. Not only for the Maya, but for all traditions there, all indigenous traditions, all the way from El Salvador to, I believe, New Mexico, where there's Canyon de Chelly. And here on the left is my flame. So this is a spindle, as you can see right here, from Ixchel, was the first weaver of the Americas, as well as the first battered woman of the Americas. And that was very shocking to me, and was a tremendous healer and healer for women. So I had my own spindle here to get busy with, the flame, and started weaving. What is that? I don't know what that is. But anyway, it's some kind of writing that I'm not sure what that means. Anyway, this is what I started after the weaving. So I began to weave this beautiful opening of, I thought about Ixchel as a vessel. And this was the pupa stage. And this piece was about this big. And I wove and wove and wove for a year. I swear to God, I was in a trance. I never left that trance. I wept. I don't know where I was. All I did was weave the entire year. And I did I think there were 7 pieces altogether. And it was all about healing Ixchel. And her story has a lot to do with the dragonfly, because as a battered woman, I'm going to cut it really short and just say that sun came down, took the form of deer, because she had come down from the heavens as the lunar goddess, came down and hid as a crab. And so the sun came down and heard, and he was very jealous. And so he knew she'd been up to no good. So he came down and took the form of deer and crushed her as a crab, which goes right back to the matriarchy, and that's a long story. But anyway, 100,000 dragonflies all over Mexico heard about her plight, that she was fragmented, and they all came and hovered over her for 13 moons. This piece, which is a dragonfly, which was the ultimate part of this whole project, was 54 inches wide. Now, Houston, I spent time in Houston off and on in the 70s. And let me just say, it was a fertile ground for the occult, for metaphysics, for all these interesting, bizarre things. And I was all into everything. I was not going to leave one thing out. In fact, I went and I think Ariel did too.
I think that's one of the reasons I stayed in Houston. I came to visit and I'm like, this is really interesting, so I stayed.
But I do believe that she and I have met Max. Have you heard of Max, the crystal skull? Well, he lives here. And what? Did anybody say anything? Anyway, he's one of the 13 crystal skulls, and really they're phenomenal. Who knows where they came from, and who cares? But they're not they're not made in your normal glass technology, because I know that technology, and I can tell you they're not made that way. So anyway, I met that, and then immediately started learning about dowsing and a few other things that I'm not going to tell you about yet. But I was going to say here, you know, many people think, and this has nothing to do with your platonic solids, but these are the platonic solids in a different format. And my friend Beth Hagens and I worked together for many years. She's an anthropologist living in Maine. And we used to have arguments about where this crystalline grid really was located. And so the outer form here was actually the platonic solids carved in stone 2,000 years ago in Thailand. Now, where the hell did that come from? And I was just like riveted when I saw that. And then here, of course, you know, you have all the elements that I call the fortunate forces attached to all this. But in Houston, a lot of this was part of my life here. There was incredible bookstores. They had speakers here from all over the country that were kind of out of the box physicists and scientists and alchemists, and it was incredible what was going on then. And there was 2 psychic schools. Sadly, I can't remember the big one. I didn't go to that one, but I did go to the smaller one. And I spent 2 years going there and learned a lot about energy. Let me tell you, he was a physicist, and I did learn a lot there. So Houston was really vibrant, and it was exciting. It had more to offer here than anything because of the smallness of it. It's not like, you know, living in California or near the Bay Area where you have to drive 100 miles to get anywhere, you know, and then nobody wants to see you, so forget about that. And so this is the crystalline grid here, and what Beth Hagens did, which was really exciting, up to then, which was 1970-something, or I don't know, 80, I don't know what it was, but it was somewhere around there. The crystalline grid was only a form of like 4 of the platonic solids, where she and her husband ended up putting all the platonic solid in. So this is covering the Earth here, and these are vortices, and there are actually 64 vortices in the whole of the Earth. And over here to the right is written by Cecilia Klein, whom I really admire. She wrote about the cosmology of the Maya, and I used her term, the beautiful woven heaven tangled earth for this piece that I did in New York, along with residency with Joyce Scott. It was the first women residencies, however you say that, the first women residents in the urban glass in Brooklyn. And we had an incredible time, and sadly I couldn't find that, the slideshow that showed all of our work all at one time. But anyway, this is inspired by the crystalline grid, but this is 3 feet. It's huge, it's quite enormous. It took me several months to work about 8 hours a day. And here's a detail. This is all woven glass of 3 millimeter. And fortunately, a year later, now this is how magical this stuff is. Now, I don't quote me on this, but I didn't know what to do with this piece. It was so big, and it was in urban glass in Brooklyn, in New York. Now, what am I going to do with it? You know, so I go back, and then I end up in Mexico, and then I end up in Texas because I'm doing an installation in Laguna Gloria. And I just sort of try to forget about this piece. And then the museum, the Corning Museum of Glass calls me up, and the curator says, "Susan, do you have any of those woven glass pieces?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. You know, we'll see." And she said, "Well, we want to buy one." And she had seen this show. She'd come down from Corning. And I said, "Well, I might have that piece." And she said, "Oh my God, let's go get it." And I flew immediately to Brooklyn, and I walked into this mess of a place. I mean, I'm telling you, you know, this glass hot shop was like a killer place. junk everywhere, you know, and I mean, it's not like they cleaned it up or anything. And they had put my piece, or I can't remember who put it there, on one of those rolling, you know, dollies, and it stayed there for a year in a hallway with people coming by with pipes and drums and that quién sabe qué. And it was there in one piece. And I looked and just literally couldn't believe it. And I said, you know, there's mystery here. There's no doubt there's mystery here. So Woven Heaven, Tangled to Earth went to Courtney. So then after that, I don't remember where I tied this all in, but I wanted to show you these pieces because they were for a museum in Wellington for the somebody. Anyway, who cares? But this is approaching, you know, a time when the world was like heating up and things were getting a little nuts. So I went down to UCLA, and in 2006 I had started looking, well, before then, quite a few years before then actually, I started looking into nebulae and the cosmos, you know, and the nebulas, and started seeing the nebulas as big flowers like the chakras in the sky, you know. And then I was invited to do this show in the National Museum in New Zealand in Wellington, and did these pieces, and this was the Mayan glyph for the Galactic Center. So suddenly the Galactic Center kept calling me, and I thought, what is going on here? Well, anyway, then I found out in 2006 that there was, this is right before I made this is why I made this, but I found out that one of the nebulas that had been discovered in 2006 was a double helix coming out of the Galactic Center. Now, how the hell is that happening out there? You know, you just can't believe it. So I went to UCLA and met with these astrophysicists, and of course they didn't know what to tell me about it either. So I thought, the hell with it, I'm going to make my own Galactic Center with a nebula coming out of it. So that's what this piece is. And it's an actual flat board, but the glass comes out, you know, quite a bit. And over here to the right, so this is called Corazón del Cielo, and this is Corazón de la Tierra. And it was about the heating of the earth. And people needed to cool down, for God's sakes, just chill, you know? And so I saw this as a tremendous need, you know, and I saw things like insects and leaves morphing, and I thought, oh my God. Anyway, so onward I went. This and made this whole show about nebulas. I was so excited to do this. So the right-hand side were glass nebulas. And then on this side, on this wall, were embroideries that mimicked and replicated the other nebulas. It was shown in Seattle. And then this was the last of the nebulas, which I call the Crown Nebula. It wasn't for years later that I discovered this Cat's Eye Nebula. I had looked at millions of photographs of the Cat's Eye Nebula, but never this one. And I was just one day browsing through nebula, and there this was. And I thought, oh my God, you know what? And I put them together, and I just thought, you know, this is telepathic. You know, it might have taken me, you know, a little while to figure this out, but there it was. So you never know. And this is one of the embroidered nebulas. Then I took over and when I was in Mexico, decided to work back again. And this took me 10 years to put this all together. But it was an exhibition. Because of the work I had done with Ishel, it was still very much in my mind, and I wanted to do something for violence against women. And so this is the project I did, which opened up at the Museo de la Ciudad in Querétaro. And we did and this is the world tree. And see, the world tree is a celestial tree. It is a generator for light. So it is a generator that goes like this, but what I did is I put these 300 cast wax figures of women with a cloak of tears, and it was like they all faced the same direction. So it was like they were chanting in the new world. And so that was this piece. And we did at the same time, I brought several of the mothers from Juarez that had lost their daughters. And they participated in the ritual. And this is you can find it on YouTube. And this was inside the museum right adjacent to the opening of the whole show. So these were different rituals that I've done. And the ritual was a healing ritual. And, never mind. I'll show you in a minute. And this was done in Mexico City, both of these, and this was at El Chopo in Mexico. So it was a beautiful thing, and I've done it in many places in Chicago and Denver and other places. And then I took seriously my love for dowsing, and I became a dowser in like 1972. I didn't tell people too much, but anyway, this is the Arunta tribe in Australia. And these are different dowsing modalities. And this is a wonderful painter and healer from Switzerland. Her name is Emma Kunz. And this is her work, and she used the pendulum in order to make these to heal people. And then I took it seriously that rather than using the pendulum to mark energy, I decided to start putting it in my work. This piece was shown at the Field Museum of Science, was the first place it showed, for an exhibition on biomimicry, biodiversity, and art as invention. And it was the first time they'd shown live artists. So this piece is quite large. Anyway, it's a pendulum, and I don't have time to tell you all about it. So if you have any questions, write to me, and I'll tell you the story. And then I was taking a walk down this beautiful Heights Boulevard, right? And I was seeing the sun catch the tops of the leaves just at the very tip. And I thought, oh my God, I'm being taught, I'm being doused by the universe. And so it was the most incredible experience. I came home and did these paintings. And this actually is a story of how the universe showed me how nature is woven into being. And over here are sycamore leaves that I discovered as I was walking. And you know, the sycamore in Egypt are considered liminal. There's the state between life and death, you know. These are extraordinary. So these pieces are about this big, the leaves. But they were dead leaves, you know, they were gorgeous. And so I couldn't help but make them. But these drawings are about 10 feet high. And then this is an installation I did at HBU, which is of the same sort of story behind nature showing us, and nature is trying to figure out what the hell we're doing. In this case, it's the creation myth. It's a new creation myth, and the universe is dousing. I don't know if you can see that. Anyway, dousing us. So the inside this here was, to me, like the earth. I should have done it round, but I didn't think about it at the time. But it was this earth in motion, and everything is in motion, and that's how I see everything happening. It's called hidden nature, and that's what I think of as hidden nature, these things that you don't see, but everything is in motion. And it was throwing out fragments, and these are the fragments that covered a whole wall on the other side. And then the pandemic hit. And here, well, I thought you'd get a kick out of that. So my interest really diverted into like energy for real, you know. For 2 years, every month I went and got my aura photographed. And these two are particularly interesting to me. And actually, I sent these to the Smithsonian, but I don't think they thought much of them. And so onward we go to energy. Energy is everything. And I can't remember the names, and I don't have time, but you know, the guy that started the Carillion photography in 1939, and then this wonderful Russian who is just doing incredible things and inventing new cameras. And I love this stuff. It's just so fascinating. So at that time, during all that, I started these star charts. and kind of taking the idea of energy and time, the time that dimensions that are crossing with each other, which I feel is happening right now. So that was a whole series of paintings. And off we move into the next thing, and the very last is that I did a set of drawings that are polar stars. Now, these are circumpolar stars. It takes 25,000 years for the polar star to go around the circumpolar stars. And I at the moment that I chose these, I think I just chose them because I love Cygnus, and I love Draco, and I love Polaris. So I did these drawings not realizing that they were going to come into use a couple of years later, or a year later. And what happened is I did another drawing, this is a year after this, and realized that what this was the Milky Way on walkabout. and so I've designed this thing. They're going to be actual projections. But this was my initial Milky Way goes on walkabout. So where does she go, right? Okay. So she goes first to Cygnus, which is in our galaxy, right, which is near. And Cygnus was during the time of Göbekli Tepe and the mystery behind Göbekli in Turkey. And that's why I thought that was really very interesting. And then this is the next polar star, which is Draco. So Milky Way is going. So what happened is during this pandemic, the world went insane. So what are we talking about? What we're talking about is the Milky Way is our mother. Everything is born from the Milky Way. And Milky Way just sat up and said, forget it. I am not doing this anymore. No more anything until I figure out what is going on. And so that's why she went on walkabout. Or in the U.S. we call it Vision Quest. So here we go to the different polar stars. And this is Polaris. One on the right is Polaris. And the Milky Way's in there. And that's Ursa Minor right there. And the one before is Draco. And that is the polar star right before Polaris. So that was a couple of thousand, 17, I don't know, thousand. That was during the Egyptian pyramids. And the one before was Turkey. So here she is in deep vision quest, trying to find our true north, right? So she comes to Earth and meets with the bee goddess. So all of this kind of comes around, and she knows that the bees are the most extraordinary creatures, because she heard from the previous work that the bees are the only thing that is sentient being, that is alive, that can actually move into the sixth dimension. So bees can actually disappear. Their dance is a six-dimensional geometry. And it was discovered by Barbara Shipman, an incredible scientist, and really I thank her for that. And so and the next thing is, my other practice is making candelabras and all this other stuff. And I really enjoy doing that as well. Thank you all.